What have you learned this week, and what would you like to recommend? What is your takeaway from this week?
Well, we, the 2030 Water Resource Group, we are a public-private civil society initiative, and working on water resources, as the name suggests. So we're quite, of course, interested in the participation of the water-using private sector in these kind of discussions. And I'm just reflecting back on sort of the old days, and when I came on board 2002, there were very few private companies in the Water Week at all. And maybe primarily those that were sort of founders of the Stockholm Water Prize. So we worked quite actively to increase the participation of the private sector in general, and in particular the water-using private sector. And it did increase quite substantially, and you have continued that work. I know that there's an echo, but hope it works okay. But still, today, I think there are far too few of the water-using companies participating in these kind of discussions. By the end of the day, they do use the main water. If you include private sector from the small businessman or woman who is the farmer up to the big multinationals, I mean, they consume 90% of the water, basically. So how many of you represent here a water-using private company? Hands up. I see one. Okay, I think
what can we do about that, Anders?
Um?
What can we do about that? You will have to guide us here.
Well, I think we could have more of the discussion. Of course, it takes a lot of preparation to engage with them beforehand. They don't just respond to an invitation to come to the Water Week. We need to engage them in the discussion, in preparation, make them more actively taking part in various seminars as co-conveners and so on to get them here. But the other point that I would like to make is around financing, which is, of course, extremely important to all of us and has been discussed. And we know that, I mean, to reach the SDG 6, we require, estimates are $114 billion per year. At present, we are at 33 or 32, 35, and so on. Only 3% of the investments in the SDG 6 today comes from the private sector, while they are using 90%. One could even ask, is that really fair? Maybe they should be convinced to invest more. So I think we need to attract and involve also the financial sector. How many does represent the financial sector here today? Hands up. I mean, private sector financing. I see once again one.
You're asking tricky questions here, Anders.
Well, just to make the point that I think it's important for us to actually reach out. Do I have time to elaborate on the financing a bit?
You do. Yes.
Okay.
Since I am disturbing you all the time.
Yeah. So, I mean, will they come on board? Yeah, they might come to the Water Week if we do engage them in these kind of discussions. Will they be convinced to finance investments? Well, that very much depends. A private sector financier has many opportunities, of course, energy, IT, communication, etc. So why should he or she invest in water if the risks there are much higher than in those other sectors? They would pick the low-hanging fruits, of course, for their investment. So I think, and they will not come in to de-risk the potential investments. We, the water sector, has to work to do that. Both to quantify, understand, describe the financial risks, and also to mitigate them, the various risks that exist, hydrological, political, social, economical, etc. And if we do that, I believe that the opportunities to leverage the limited public funding that we have with the private sector funding can be substantially increased. We're quite good at reducing hydrological risk. At least we, the water sector, knows how to do that, both floods and drought and so on. We also know that we can reduce the economic risks, for example, in water utilities by improving the management of that utility. But when it comes to reducing the social and political risk, we are not as used in working to do that. And I think the whole discussion here about the multi-stakeholder approach can be part of that solution. How to build the relationships between the various stakeholders, how to eventually build the trust between them that can take down the political and social risks, that can enable us to actually move towards financing of the investments that are needed. I stop there. I can
Great.
elaborate on that, but...
We might come back if we have time.
Yeah.
Good recommendations for future. Great. Dhesigen, your minister has been really active here at the week. Yes. So what is your takeaway and recommendations and reflections perhaps too?
Let me talk about the thing that inspired me, the things that encouraged me, and the things that I was worrying about. Let's start with the inspiration. We've been talking a lot about gender. I come from a part of the world that intensively talks about the burden of lack of access to water and sanitation has on the girl child. And we talk about it in very negative terms, about an unwieldy burden that we have to carry. My point of inspiration, Karin, was at the prize giving on Wednesday night. There was a beautiful picture of Joan Rose meeting the 3 young girls from Thailand who won the Junior Water Prize. Yes. And surely that tells us something very important. It says that we do have women leadership in the world. We need to expand it. We do have the future leaders in the world in the form of the girl child. And it was also particularly significant around the combination of someone from the developed world almost handing over a baton to the 3 young girls from the developing world. That honestly was my point of inspiration for the week. I think it was absolutely remarkable. But my minister has been very busy in this forum, and the thing about busy ministers is they create a lot of work for the people around them. So, following on what...
We've been busy.
Yeah, we've been busy, and we're going to be busy. But the point of encouragement that came out of her comments, as well as comments from various other people, is the central role of knowledge and innovation around the pathways that we want to plot out to achieve the SDGs and the developmental agenda. This is absolutely pivotal. For far too long, we were obsessed with the donor-recipient discussion about technology transfer, around exporting solutions. We're now talking much, much more about developing and conceiving and constructing those solutions together, and that is wonderful. We also expanded the envelope around the areas of influence and what influences us. The Deputy Secretary General of the UN started off by talking about life and dignity, which we've been talking about for a long time, but he added the element of peace. And that rapidly expands the conversation because the political barriers around the extension of water is something we are too shy to talk about. And I'm glad it's out there in the open, and I'm glad we're expanding the conversation. The thing that I worry about is I think we're a clever group of people, even if some of us are gray in gray suits already. The problem is that we're not recognizing the nature of the competition that exists out there. SDG 6 does not have any supremacy over any of the others. We are not absorbing sufficiently that very soon from now, we are going to be in a rampant competition with all of the warriors for those other SDGs. We have to get ahead of the game. Water is a beautiful connector. We tell ourselves about this all of the time. We need now to tell everybody else about this. Water constructs the narrative as being the enabling condition that makes the entire suite of the SDGs possible. This is something I think we're going to have to do a lot more of, a lot more frequently, which also means that some of us need to go to fewer World Water Weeks and many more other weeks, and invite many people from those other weeks to come and join us. Those are my opening comments here.
Thank you. I think what you raised to the end is really important. I mean, we hear a lot of lip service saying that we need to work on the comprehensive agenda, working horizontally, but I think you're right that to the end of the day, it's a very big risk for competition as well. So, I mean, a question back to you would then be, how can we be better at explaining water as a connector? Because that is something that we have been discussing amongst ourselves. We say water is a connector, but what do we really mean by that? I mean, if you dig into that, I think we need to be better to really explain and put forward examples. So that would also be interesting to discuss with you, how we can do that. Anthony, I'm sure your boss kept you very busy in the beginning of the week too, as he was here.
No doubt about that. Mr. Gurria is a huge champion of water. It's something that is very close to his heart, and it's always very pleasing to have him come along to these kind of events where he I think, imparts a huge energy and enthusiasm to the proceedings. The OECD was very pleased to be a key collaborating partner this year. We co-convened a few seminars here, one on water and growth, water finance, water governance. And I've been coming to the Water Week for a few years now, and it struck me over this period that two themes always sell out crowds here, and increasingly so, becoming increasingly important. One on finance, and one is governance. And I would underscore the points that Anders made about how finance is so central to the whole way in which we're going to move forward on meeting our climate goals, meeting our SDG goals, meeting the Addis Ababa commitments, and trying to ensure that we have enough finance is a major task for both policymakers and the private sector. I think we're making progress on the financing front. We've now got a much stronger idea about the virtuous cycle of water and growth, that good water management and water security can enhance growth, and economic growth can also provide the funds to invest more in water security. But there's still there's a lot of work to be done. I made an analogy in a talk I gave earlier this week about how in the case of water, in the case of financing, the water sector is still toddling along. We're still at toddler stage compared to a sector like the renewable energy sector, which is up and running and really well ahead of the game. So if you look across these sectors, what is missing in the water sector are a few things. One is the water financiers are looking for more stable institutions, stronger institutions and more stable institutions. They are looking for revenue streams, stable revenue streams. This is something the energy sector has that the water sector is still struggling to get in a strong and stable way. So that means we need to have a more honest and open conversation about pricing, and we cannot avoid that. And most importantly, and this is something I've just learned in the last year in work we're doing at the OECD on clean energy investment, is financiers actually don't care what they invest in. There's very few heart financiers out there, very few ethical financiers, if you like. They will want ready-made packages of projects that they don't have to do much work for. They'll get a nice, stable stream of returns, but they don't want to become water experts. They want it fed up to you. They want it served up to them. So we have a lot of work to do in order to be able to get to that stage. And one of the things, a little plug here, the OECD Roundtable on Water that we're convening with the World Water Council and the government of the Netherlands aims to try and move that agenda forward. On the governance side, that's another issue that has been going from strength to strength. And once again, if you don't have good governance, you're never going to get anywhere. But governance is a means, not an end. So we need to be able to get better understanding of how governance is having an impact on the outcomes, particularly in relation to the SDGs and SDG 6. And one of the concerns I have is the debate about indicators for our 169 targets under SDG 6. Is perhaps focusing on those areas which are the easiest.
Exactly.
It's where we can easily reach agreement about a number of hydrological indicators, a number of economic indicators. These governance and soft areas are a lot harder to get a handle on, and I think we run the risk of sidelining a very important part of our of the solution if we don't put more effort into better understanding what kind of governance indicators we can do. And once again, a little plug, the OECD is doing a lot of work, and many of you know Aziza Akmush, who's leading our water governance work. We've done a lot of work on getting these indicators together, and I think platforms like the Stockholm World Water Week provide a very good basis for us to try and advance year on year and push forward on these frontiers, on both finance and governance, and of course on other issues.
So maybe that would be something we talked before about, that we will continue to take stock on what is happening, and maybe we can sort of, with your help, think of how we can pursue these issues. Because if I am correctly informed, I think that many of the indicators for Goal 6 are sort of referred to the third tier, meaning that these are the ones that are more sort of difficult to deal with.
They're too hard.
Yeah, too hard and not really at the forefront. So here we have a lot of work to do, I believe. I think you have a lot to say, Anders, to build on what Anthony was saying, but I was going to ask you, Dhesigen, pricing of water and valuing of water from your perspective, how do you jump into that discussion?
With great difficulty, but it's one of those things where we realize we have to be brave. I mean, the reality is that all of us, wherever we come from in the world, have grown up with the paradigm of the public good of water. Well, the public can't afford that good anymore because there's far too much bad going on. The time to get into realistic pricing regimes that have some reasonable reflection and connection to the actual value of water is unavoidable. I mean, right now in South Africa, like many countries in the world, we're introducing a new pricing regime. We know the fight we're going to be up against. And I hope that next year, in next year's Water Week, we can unbundle at least one of those big parts of the fight. And that's around the waste discharge charge, the cost of using the waterways to get rid of your pollution, and what that should mean in terms of pricing. Because there are lots of models, and they're complicated models, but they're things that we have to face up to. Because the bottom line is that it is not a classical business case of an in and out. We are dealing with a resource that have implications far beyond the economic domain. The irony is that while most other sectors have started off working with the economic domain and building the other blocks, we've come from the other side and generally ignored the elephant in the room. So on pricing, there are three aspects that we have to do. One is we have to bravely put out the models, as imperfect as they are, out there. We need to pilot them and learn from them. And we need to carry the environmental justice and the human needs quota into those discussions. And then perhaps we have the kind of regimes that we're going to work with that will help us both around the financial matters, which is critically important, but also raise up the bar on efficiency of use and wise use of water.
Anders?
Yeah, on pricing, I think there's so many different uses of water, and for each of them you could have different kind of mechanism for the pricing. For the pricing of household use, I mean, you have a great scheme in South Africa, which is sort of, you have a certain volume for free, and then the more the use, the more you pay, etc., and thereby can create the financial stability of the institution in spite of subsidizing for the poorest of the poor. So that's sort of one aspect. But what I would like to touch upon is pricing for other uses of water, for example, industrial uses, which normally are much higher than the household use. To give you just two examples of the work that we are doing, in Mongolia, when the multi-stakeholder platform came together and started to discuss, the private sector actually at the table said to the government that, well, we don't think the current tariff structure for our use, industrial use of water in Mongolia works. First of all, you guys, the government doesn't really impose it, so only the good guys are actually paying, almost like on a voluntary basis. And even for us who pay, the tariffs are so low that they don't really incentivize us to use the water more efficiently. So we're willing to work with you to reform the tariff structure. So we started with a water valuation and came up with a system for valuing water, including customary sort of traditional rights and environmental values and so on. And then based on that, design a new tariff structure for commercial water use. and also economic incentives to reduce discharge of wastewater, etc., that everyone agreed on around the table, civil society, private sector and government, and with higher tariffs than before. And that was, of course, music to the ears for the minister, who had been fighting colleagues in cabinet and lost and had kept the tariffs low. Now she could go back to the cabinet with a new proposal saying, this we have developed now with the private sector. You can't oppose this. I had another, but I stopped there to give you some more time.
I'm going to leave the word. This is becoming kind of a cliffhanger to next year, right? So, because we need to discuss this more. So I would say that this is to be continued discussion for next year, right? Because it's really relating to wastewater reuse and circular economy. But Anthony, I'm sure you have a second round, and then I'm going to ask you also to conclude by one recommendation for next week. And I will ask the same question for the two others as well.
As an economist, I'm never shy of an opinion on water pricing. It's music to my ears. But I think one of the evolutions I think that has occurred in the last couple of years is that we've moved away from viewing pricing in just the context of water service delivery, of delivering water to a household or to an industry. Now, if we take a look at pricing or financing across the whole water cycle, where we bring in the full range of water users, and as the point was made before, that there's a lot of public good aspects to water, and we can start to think about user charges for flood management, user charges for discharge, user charges for the development of water resources that benefits urban planners. So we have a much broader canvas of policy options now if we start to think across who benefits from water management and who should pay and then who can afford to pay. I think we have more options now than we did have a few years ago, and they're starting to be thought of as a package of pricing and financing that governments can employ.
Thank you very much. And one recommendation, or something that you think we should bring to the table next year? Of course, evidently these discussions, but...
Next year, on with the theme on wastewater and water discharge, reuse, I think what I would recommend is that we have a really good focus on what kind of business models are going to be necessary to make a reality out of increasing the reuse and recycling of water. These have to be integrated business models. We have to have a look at more innovative approaches than we have up to date.
Thank you very much. Dhesigen.
You want the recommendation?
Yes.
Let me make two. One, a process.
We want to improve all the time, so I'm not afraid of criticism.
The one thing is that the process thing is that those seminars that worked so very well this year had their own bus stops leading up to this convergence point. And I think that what we need to encourage the broader community of practice to do is adopt that methodology, because it organizes for you to come out with a much more meaningful results when you get to Water Week. The second recommendation is that we are in the space where we're going to start thinking about this global water and sanitation revolution in a much more practical way. And we're talking about technology leapfrogs, infrastructure leapfrogs, even policy and legislative leapfrogs. And in that context, we need to be looking much more at the developing world as the laboratory in which we can try this out at scale. This is critically important. I mean, if I talk about Africa for a moment, it is that continent where we know in 30 years from now we'll have 50 megacities, 3 of which currently exist. So this is the global greenfield site to try out these large-scale pilots. So I would like to invite the whole global community, this partnership, to come and use this laboratory. We've got Africa, we've got Asia, we've got Latin America. Let us use this to recharacterize what 21st century can be for water for the world.
Thank you very much. And Anders?
Well, firstly, to say that I really appreciate the theme next year. I think it's really important that we address the issues related to, well, wastewater from various sources and the aspects of pollution, which is something that I don't think we have discussed enough in Water Weeks in general and should pay more attention to. So that's great. I think what we need to do is to also develop, as was referred to earlier, the business cases for improved wastewater treatment, reuse, etc. And I say business cases in pluralist because I do believe that there are a number of various sort of business cases that can be made from the different perspectives of different stakeholders. I mean, the government can have one business case for this, the industry can have another one, and so on, and think through these different business cases. And in order to do that, so that's the recommendation then, I think you should include all the international business associations for the various economic sectors. I mean, there's these international business associations for mining industry or pulp and paper and textile and so on, and have them as key collaborating partners and work with them in sort of the discussions about how to organize these great seminars, etc., not the other water organizations.
Thank you very much. Fantastic. I mean, it's 10 to 12, and you're still full of ideas and enthusiasm. So thank you very much for coming here.